Violence has flared up in the Middle East again. Specifically, in this case, we're talking about Israel and Palestine. There's a kid who you're seeing in the picture next to me that got significantly hurt. I'm going to tell you about him in just a second, but I got to give you the background first. What seemed to have precipitated these round of events is, first of all, 3 Israeli settler youth being captured and killed. That's Naftali Frankel, Gilad Shaer, and Eyal Yifrah there. And 2 of them were 16 years old, and another one was 19 years old. And that was an absolute tragedy. And then in retaliation, apparently 6 people then kidnapped a Palestinian teenager who was then killed. And he died in the most gruesome of ways, unfortunately, in the ways that we're going to explain for you here in a second. His name is Khudeir, and he was 15 years old. God, he looks even younger than that there. And recently they had his funeral. I'm going to show you pictures of that. And obviously people were very, very upset, and that's triggered a whole new round of protests, escalations, strikebacks. And in fact, 8 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli strikes in response to Hamas rocket fire that was fired into Israel because they're angry about the killing of the 15-year-old. Now, the 15-year-old there was not just killed, he was burned alive. And so the reports are, I have to warn you, are incredibly gruesome. They got burns on 90% of his body. The results, according to the Palestinian Attorney General, show he was breathing while on fire and died from burns and their consequences. He also said the young man had suffered wounds on the right side of his head, apparently from impact with a rock or another hard object. The autopsy found evidence that Abu Khudeir had breathed in the flames as burns were found inside his body, in his lungs, bronchial tubes, and his throat. So that's about as terrible a way to go as possible. Now, Israel condemned that in the strongest words. Prime Minister Netanyahu said, "We acted immediately to apprehend the murderers," and apparently they have now 6 suspects in custody who have apparently confessed, by the way. "We will bring them to trial. They will be dealt with to the fullest extent of the law. We denounce all brutal behavior. The murder of your son is abhorrent and cannot be countenanced by any human beings." That's, of course, good to hear. Now, the Israeli reaction in other quarters, not as encouraging. We'll get to that in a second. But one other person who was discussed was commentator in Israel, Sima Kadmon, and he said, for the murder of Mohammed, and that's the young Palestinian boy who was killed, there is shame, immense shame and disgrace over the fact that such a thing happened among us. Who we are so certain that it could not happen among us, that only Arabs can be so cruel. Now that sounded nice in the beginning, and then he ruined it at the end by saying, well, obviously Arabs can be that cruel, but Israelis can't. So the fact that it happened is amazing and is filled with shame. Well, that's what inflames the tensions in the first place. When you say ridiculous things like all they understand is violence, only they could be this cruel. How about state violence, which then leads, unfortunately, to our next part of the story, and the kid you're seeing in the picture there that we've been showing you. And that is, unbelievably, Abu Khudeir's cousin, who was looking on in the protests because his cousin had been killed, happens to be a 15-year-old Palestinian from the U.S. He's actually from Florida, and he was visiting the occupied territories, and Israeli police see him looking at the protests. They claim participating. Khudeir's family says not participating. Okay, we'll get to that in a second as well. And they pounce on him. Okay, so here's the result of what happened there. So that is among the pictures, but it's okay. We have video. You're going to see him for yourself here in a second on NBC News. In fact, let's go to that and get his view of what happened.
I was watching the protest until I saw some guys screaming from the left side of me, and behind them there were some soldiers, and there was a fence in front of me, and I tried to jump the fence, and I fell after the fence, and the soldiers jumped the fence, and they picked me up and started punching me. After a little, I went unconscious, and then they took me to the hospital.
And when did you resume consciousness?
When I was in the hospital.
That's when you woke up, and did you know what had happened to you?
From the beginning, I only remember the beginning because when they punched me a couple of times, I remember them punching me, and after the couple of punches, I went unconscious.
Okay, it's hard to stomach. We're going to show you more video in a second because you've got to see what's happening in order to fully understand the context here. But first, more from this interview.
Have you seen the video of yourself when you were being beaten?
Yeah.
What do you think when you see yourself and what happened?
I can't believe it. I was like, there's just a kid watching what's going on, and how can you just go over there and brutally beat him like that?
So now let's go to a full video. Again, this is released to Palestinian media in the first place, then just replayed as you saw there in American media as well. But this is the full context of the video where they believe that this kid, Tariq Abu Khudeir, was beaten by Israeli police. Watch. So as you can see here, they're stomping on him. They've obviously already got him down. And if you want to question the authenticity of it, although obviously a lot of media has accepted that it is authentic, they're doing it to somebody. If you say, okay, I'm not absolutely positive it's the 15-year-old in question, well, from the video, it does appear that certainly someone who is more than detained, more than under control, and yet the beating continues. You're going to see them dragging his body right there. And remember, this is amazingly, coincidentally, the cousin of Mohammed Abu Khudeir, who was the 15-year-old who was burned alive. So yeah, his missus' cousin, he goes to look at the protests, and then this is what happens as he's being dragged away. Okay. I know it's disturbing to look at, but you got to understand that this is the kind of stuff that happens every day and you don't get to see. And let's be realistic here. One of the reasons we're seeing it is because he happened to be a dual citizen and also an American. And he speaks perfectly good English, and so Western media can interview him as well. But how many of those beatings happen when you don't see it? You see, that's state violence. So when you occupy someone, it's not consequence-free. When you occupy a country for 47 years, well, if they don't listen or you don't like what they're doing or they're protesting, you take their 15-year-olds and you bash their skull in. So yes, what happened to his cousin, which Israel condemns strongly, is horrible. And the state did not do that, okay? But the state did do this. And every once in a while when they get caught, they say, oh, that's a shame and that's an aberration because you happen to be taping it. But it's not an aberration. That's exactly what happens in an occupation. If you do not follow orders, and sometimes even when you do follow orders, they will bash your head in anyway. You see, that's how you enforce an occupation. Now, the news outlets here also asked Abu Khudeir, who was beaten, about his cousin who had been killed.
I'm blown away because I was just with my cousin and I still remember his voice and I still can't believe he's dead. I feel like he just went somewhere and he's gonna come back. I don't know what to say. I'm speechless.
Were you with him the night he was killed?
Yeah, I was with him the night he was killed. We were playing a game and then I left him. And then a while later, right before he got kidnapped, I said hi and he did not answer, and I kept walking, kept driving, and then I came back 10 minutes later and there were the cops.
Now, Israeli Defense Forces say, no, he wasn't just looking on at the protests, he was protesting. News story explains he was detained, according to the Israelis, with a slingshot in his possession. Now, if that isn't the perfect analogy, I don't know what is.